Today, I'm giving you 10 Netflix recommendations of films directed by women. My name is Clara and you're watching 5 to 9. Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. If you've read the title, you know what you're in for. Let's get started with comedy. My first recommendation is the film Clueless, directed by Amy Heckerling. It's a 1995 teen comedy that was definitely a staple of its time. And even if that movie is not from your generation, you'll probably find out that some of the verbatim of the time and quotes from the movie are still very relevant today.
As if!
Not to mention a lot of the cast will look really familiar, except they're all really young. People like Alicia Silverstone, Paul Rudd, Stacey Dash, Breckin Meyer, is that how you pronounce his name? Eliza Donovan, and Wallace Shawn, to mention a few. It follows Alicia Silverstone's character, Cher, who is a very popular and influential teenager. She goes to a Beverly Hills high school, which is where a lot of the story unfolds. She tries to play Cupid so that two of her teachers start dating. But because her and her friends want them to be more lenient with grades.
Project?
Which apparently made a lot of sense in the 90s, I don't know. To me, it kind of felt like the predecessor of Mean Girls and Gossip Girl all in one. It's fun to see like 90s culture and all like the technology and the way they talked and dressed. It's a really funny coming of age story regardless of its time, and I think everyone should watch it. My second recommendation is the Spanish comedy Despite Everything, directed by Gabriela Tagliavini. It's a very unconventional family story. And when I say very unconventional, I mean bruh. You're in for a ride. So the story is around this family with 4 sisters. They're all grown up. Like, I think they're all in like their 30s and late 20s. So it's kind of like coming of middle age story. It feels like a coming of age story, but they've already come of age. And they're very estranged from each other in a way. They don't talk to each other that much. They're all out and about living their own lives, but their mother passes away. That's not a spoiler, by the way. Like, if you watch the promotion videos, you would know that. So when that happens, they all go back to Madrid for the service. And after that, they're waiting for the will to be read. And instead of that happening, they find out that their mother left them a video. In that video, she reveals that the father who raised them is not actually their biological father. And he knew it. They had some sort of arrangement. I told you this was an unconventional story, right? So knowing that her daughters were not very close, she made up this rule that in order to have access to their inheritance, they have to go on this road trip together and follow all these clues to find all of their biological fathers. In hindsight, it doesn't really make sense because they all seem kind of well off from the start. It feels like a very candid sort of story, like they're all understanding more of themselves. And as I told you, like, it feels like a coming of age story because they're still learning. It made me laugh, it made me cry, and it's really fun to see them come to terms with themselves and with their mother too, in a way, and their whole family. I don't think this one has any nudity, but it has some like drawings. Yeah, make sure you check that as well before you watch any of these to be sure that they're up to your standards, whatever they are. My next recommendation is I'm Not an Easy Man by Eleanor Puyat. It's a French rom-com and it's really funny. So the film follows this really sexist man, and after being literally hit in the head,
Damien?
He is transported to this like parallel universe where gender roles are reversed. And I'm so glad this movie was directed by a woman. From the beginning, I was a little fearful because I thought that it could easily turn into what a man thinks being a woman is like, but it didn't. I feel like in a way it's really educational at the same time that it is funny. This man that was like at the top and literally harassed women from the beginning of the movie, it's now finding himself feeling peer pressured into fitting into this new society that he's in. Really funny, really recommend it. Next we have What a Girl Wants, directed by Denny Gordon. It's an early 2000s teen comedy, but it still has that 90s vibe to it. I mean, it stars Amanda Bynes, so it's kind of that era of teen comedy.
What does that mean?
So she's an American teenager and she finds out that her father is an English politician. So she goes to London, there's romance. It's a teen comedy movie. I mean, is there anything else I have to say? So it's that kind of feel-good vibe. If that's what you're looking for, I definitely recommend it. If you feel like procrastinating but you still want to do something somewhat productive, you can watch a documentary, right? Here are 2 documentaries I think you should watch that are on Netflix and that were directed by women. Number 1, we have 13th, a documentary directed by Ava DuVernay. It was released in 2016, but it's still very relevant, especially in the context that the US is in right now. This documentary shows like a very clear timeline from when slavery was abolished back in the 19th century in the US, but that the 13th Amendment is sort of this lawful loophole that keeps people enslaved, and how that incentivizes institutions to keep people incarcerated so they can use them for labor. The second documentary recommendation I have for you is Take Your Pills, directed by Alison Clayman. It's basically a deep dive into what productivity culture kind of fails, and how people who don't necessarily need medication end up taking them so they can have like a higher performance, and the consequences and all of that in society from everywhere from like high school until you're in the workforce. It's very eye-opening. I didn't realize how ubiquitous this prescription of stimulants is in the US. And it's really worrying how easily young people can get access to this sorts of medication. So if you're more in a reflective vibe, I would recommend this one. Moving on to our Dramedies. I feel like Dramedy is a category of its own now because it's so common and there are so many good movies in this category that it was hard to pick. The first one is really recent. It's called The Half of It by Alice Wu. I loved it so much because from the beginning, it had everything to be one of those coming of age stories where best friends realize that they're actually in love with each other, but it's not. It has so many layers. I think that especially the family dynamics from all the characters are so very well written. I feel like especially Ali, Aster, and Paul, I think it's really easy to understand where they're coming from when they talk about family or how they feel about their families, even though we don't see much of them. But yeah, it's a dramedy. You're gonna laugh and cry and love it. Next, we have Like Father by Laura Miller Rogan, and it is very interesting. I was surprised that it came out in 2018 because it has more of an early 2000s feel for it, if you know what I mean. And I mean that as a good thing, just in case that's not clear. So we meet Rachel, Kristen Bell's character. She is getting married, but she is left at the altar. Yikes. But her father, who she hadn't talked to in a long time and apparently had no real relationship with, shows up to that wedding. Basically, what happens is she's really frustrated. She goes out drinking, her father's there too. And when she wakes up, she is in her honeymoon destination, which is on a couple's cruise with her father.
That's fucked up.
You see what I mean by an early 2000s sort of movie? I get that from that movie. Then we have an Indian movie called Dil Dhakne, which translates to Let the Heart Beat, directed by Zoya Akhtar. I think that's how you pronounce it. It is so different. So we follow the Mira family. I forgot how it's pronounced. They're a very affluent family. They're a couple with 2 grown adult kids. The daughter is already married, the son is not, and the father is like grooming the son to take over the family company, but he doesn't seem that interested. It is a very affluent family, so they're taking whole extended family and friends on like a boat trip for their anniversary. They're having like a big milestone anniversary. It feels a little westernized to me. I don't know if that's like the demographic they were looking for. All of the main characters are either in a forbidden love situation or in a bad arranged marriage or both. To me, it felt a little much. It's still relevant to the plot, but it felt like it was a lot to have all of them in one of those situations. And honestly, I kind of wish this was like a mini series because it could definitely be longer than 3 hours. And I wished I learned more about some of the characters. There's a lot in the story to explore in the past and what happens in the future. Because when it ends, I'm like, I want to see more. For the next recommendation, I have a movie that I feel like everyone and their mom have watched. But still, if you don't know what movie I'm talking about already, it's the 2017 coming-of-age story Lady Bird by Greta Gerwig. Casting? Chef's kiss. We got Saoirse Ronan, Timothée Chalamet. We got Beanie Feldstein, being amazing as always. Lady Bird is a coming-of-age story of this high school senior. I watched this in the movie theater and I bawled my eyes out because I connected so much to her character. Not to every little detail, but especially this aspiration to be more than your town and to go out and see the world. This might be a little bit of a spoiler, so maybe skip that part if you haven't watched the movie, but I like that both of the boys that she ends up going out with are not really right for her. We need more of that narrative. I feel like we still see a lot of the high school sweetheart as the pinnacle of happiness and love life. If you don't find the love of your life in your hometown, that's also not the end of the world. Just like Lady Bird, you have a lot of life ahead of you. So if you haven't watched it and you like coming of age stories, this should be on the top of your list. If you like this video, don't forget to check other videos on 5 to 9. We post every Tuesday and Thursday, so subscribe for more. Bye!